Today, we're going to get a little bit personal. This video is about you. So I want to ask you a very personal question here. And I know it's a video and I can't hear you respond, but it's something that you probably need to hear yourself respond to. So what I want to get at here is, do you have anybody in your life, in photography, but I guess it could relate to any skill, that you would consider to be kind of a mentor figure, somebody that you look up to, you respect their work, but more importantly, you respect what they're going to have to say about your work? So the reason that I ask this is I make these photography videos and my goal is to help people. I've been doing this going on 13 years now, and it's something that's really important. And a lot of times when I'm coming up with what it is that I want to talk about, I look at my own development and how I've learned. And I've mentioned this before, I actually don't have any formal training in photography at all. I have formal training in music, and I use that as a springboard for a lot of ideas and a lot of self-teaching that I've done, but it's through looking at work from other people. It's through taking classes here and there. I have a couple things that I've done, but finding a mentor, I mean, this is one of the most important things I think anybody can do for their own skill set, and I want to talk a little bit about this in this video. And I've got a surprise for you, but I'm going to get to that. It's actually really cool, and I'm really excited about it. But first, I want to talk about this idea of mentors. So the first mentor that I had in photography, I've talked about here and there in various videos, but it was somebody who was one of my dad's best friends growing up. This guy, Greg Booth, an amazing photographer. He was kind of a rock star locally. In fact, probably more than locally. Back in those days, this would have been the 70s and the 80s. Annual reports were the big thing. He was a commercial photographer. He had apprenticed with Arnold Newman in New York. I had no idea who Arnold Newman was, but everybody used to talk about, oh, well, Greg studied with Newman, and then he came down to Dallas and started his own studio. Greg was immensely successful. He was a character and a half, a really good friend, and he was somebody that I looked up to very much when I was growing up, before I even got serious about photography, because Greg just had this thing about him. He was extremely good at what he did. He had a personality that was bigger than anything, and he was just a really interesting guy, and everybody looked up to Greg as like the guy in town. I mean, he was, if you wanted to know what was going on in photography or how to do something, you look at Greg. He was the man. I remember as a kid, we would go over to their house, and they had a collection of photographs, Henri Cartier-Bressons, all these famous stuff. I didn't know who any of those people were, but I just there was something about going and looking at that stuff. And they didn't have any kids that were my age. They had a daughter who was my sister's age, so I really didn't have anybody to run around with. So that's what I would do, is I would observe their collection of photographs. And you would talk to Greg and hear stories. He traveled probably about 250 days out of the year. He was always on the road. He was a really interesting dude. And you look up to this guy and it's like, well, this is certainly successful. And it wasn't until, I don't know, much later when I got serious about photography, when I started to look at his work and thought, oh my gosh, this is I'm too close to the forest to see the trees here. This is somebody that I know and really respect. I had an opportunity, and this would have been 1998 or so, and this was back when everybody was building their first website, and the internet was definitely a thing. And at the time, I was freelancing, and I was doing whatever I could to make money. So I did some photography gigs. I was still doing some music stuff, and I also learned how to code HTML. I taught myself ActionScript, and I was doing some Flash work, and so I was building websites, and Greg hired me to build his website for the studio. Greg would be on the road 250 days out of the year, and he had 7 photographers that worked in the studio, and they did all the catalog photography and product stuff. It was an amazing operation, and they did extremely good work. I mean, every photographer who worked there was just amazing. But I realized with this project that this was an opportunity. I was having to go through and catalog a lot of Greg's work. We were doing scans. We were just kind of gathering everything to bring into portfolios, and he would ask my opinion on things, and I realized, wait a minute, this is the time to where I can start picking his brain too. And so what we would do is I'd go over to this house, and we'd start, usually in the early afternoon. 5 o'clock would roll around. We might have a drink or two, and then I had an opportunity to stay as long as I possibly could, to ask as many questions as I could. If you don't know Greg, you wouldn't know his personality, but I mean, he was kind of a class clown in some ways. He was very funny, very entertaining, and just this big personality. But when you could get him to focus in on something and start talking about art and design and how things fit together and composition, I mean, this is where I got a wealth of knowledge, and you get him talking about his passion, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I just realized the Richard Avedon print back here, Joe Lewis's fist that you see behind me. Greg got me big time into Richard Avedon. He was a huge fan of anything Avedon. I didn't know who Avedon was, and he got me into a lot of these guys and learning how to appreciate this work. Sadly, Greg did suffer from a lot of health problems, and around that same time, he kind of retired, and you wouldn't find his work anywhere today because he was kind of this time before the internet, even though we put together this first website. But eventually, he did pass away at way too early an age, and this is somebody, I'm opening up to you guys, this is somebody who was so special to me. There is, to this day, there isn't a day that goes by where I don't think about Greg. Putting together this studio, doing this YouTube channel, these are things that, I mean, he would have just been all over. There was no YouTube back when we were working together and doing all that stuff, and it was something that he never got a chance to experience. But that is, for me, that is a mentor. That is somebody that, not only is going to teach you stuff, but that you can trust. At the time, I never really showed Greg my own work for the most part. I did do a show once, and this is kind of interesting. So early days of Flickr, this is a couple of years before Greg died, there was a group of us on Flickr who got together locally and thought, well, let's do a show. And we had a show at the W, which is a very fancy hotel downtown Dallas. And we did this show, and I put a bunch of my work up, and I'll never forget, Greg came and bought one of my pieces. And it meant so much to me. I mean, it just floored me. And he actually had some things to say about that. And I realized today that that was an opportunity where what I didn't do in that mentorship relationship was share my own work. And I've always been very shy about my own work. I really don't share a lot of it on this show, and you guys know that. This show is about more than me. It's not about me showing off, hey, look at what I can do. It's about just my passion for photography. And so that's what I've always put into it. But when he bought that print that time, I mean, that meant so much to me. And it got me thinking about this whole thing. And that's why I wanted to bring this up in this video. Do you have anybody in your life that is like that you can look up to, that you respect the opinion of? And I think these are the things that, like, there's a lot you can learn by looking at work. We do this in these videos all the time. There's a lot you can learn by understanding concepts of composition and going through the theoretical aspects of it. But when it comes down to it, there is a personality that you need to bring out in your own work. And it's really hard for all of us to judge our own work. I will admit that I'm the worst at it. Sometimes people will say, they'll be looking at stuff that I've done and wow, that's a great photograph, and I never thought about it. Or something that I thought was really great, nobody reacts to. And so it's really tough to judge your own work sometimes and what you're doing right and what maybe you need to be working more on. And this is where a mentor comes into play. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to find a mentor, and I have a surprise for you. I'm just saying, it's coming up. But real quick, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor this week, who, speaking of mentors, they're the awesome folks over at Skillshare, and somebody you need to check out. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people like you. It is a place to explore new skills. You can deepen existing passions and basically just get lost in creativity. Are you holed up at home? Spontaneous acts of creativity may help break up the routine of a day spent indoors. Explore some workshops and classes to help you get out of that rut. So one class that I've been looking at a lot this week is Street Photography: Unlock the Secrets of Composition, Color, and Confidence. This one is taught by Craig Whitehead, who you guys might actually know. I've featured him on this show a number of times. He goes under the moniker 6 Street Under on various social platforms. This class is excellent, as I would expect no less from Craig. He's a fabulous photographer with a really good understanding of the history of what's come before him, but he adds his own personal spin on the top. He is an excellent photographer. This class is going to teach you things like having confidence, preparing to shoot, being able to pre-visualizing the scene, capturing fleeting moments, playing with abstraction, making selects, editing, and everything. And so I really recommend this. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to use the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so that you can start exploring your creativity today. So click on the link below and check it out. And I want to give a special shout out and thanks to the awesome folks over at Skillshare for sponsoring this video. So how do you go about finding a mentor? And this is a question I actually get asked a lot, and I've been asked a lot over the years, and it's a really hard one to answer, because a mentor relationship in a formal sense can be kind of scary to a lot of people. And I think what worked when I considered Greg to be my mentor is that it wasn't a formalized thing. I never once said, hey, would you be willing to be my mentor and be honest with feedback about my own work? I looked for opportunities. I became friends. Well, we were already friends because he was one of my dad's really good friends, but I had that. And I think that if I were going for that with somebody else, that's probably how I would approach it. And you also have to consider this: when you reach out to somebody, especially like via email or something, it's going to be really hard because, look, people are busy, especially when they're successful. And sometimes it's like that's a huge volunteer time commitment that somebody just kind of throws up their guard with. And so that's sometimes not a real good way to go either. I think the best way to go is to look for opportunities and build relationships. And you have to be somewhat social about this. You've got to get out and you've got to meet people, and you've got to seek out people that you actually have this kind of relationship with. We have the internet now, and you can reach out to people online. And rather than scare them by saying, hey, are you going to be my mentor or what? You can ask questions and you can just start to build a relationship with respect. I mean, that's just kind of how it's done. Greg passed away. This would have been 2008. And I went a number of years where I didn't have anybody that I would look up to that way. And I look back at that period, and it's kind of a period where this sounds over dramatic, but I kind of ceased to grow a little bit. It does sound a little dramatic, but when I look back at that time in my life, I think that's something that I was missing. And this actually started to become a realization when we got into 2020 and last year when the pandemic hit and everybody shut down. And, I've talked about that before too, that just kind of battling depression and a lot of things and looking for inspiration and all this. Well, one thing I have not talked about on this show at all, because I didn't do it for the show. So it was very important that this stay under the radar for me at that time. But I had an opportunity to study with Ralph Gibson. We set up a series of Zoom calls, and I since took another class with him. And if you're not familiar with who Ralph Gibson is, he's one part of the New York School of Photography from the 70s and 80s, who is one of the most incredible conceptual. A lot of times his work gets lumped in with surrealism, as does everybody's from that period. But he's amazing. His sense of composition. He was one of the first books I ever bought. I had no idea who he was, and over the years, I've just developed this intense respect for Ralph and his work. He is one of my absolute heroes in photography. So I had this opportunity to study with Ralph, and we had our first call, and I jumped on there, and Ralph knows who I am. We've actually met before. I did some videos with Ralph. I'll link them up here or below if you want to see them. Highly recommended. I just met Ralph in New York. It was kind of a last minute deal, and I did some filming around his studio when he was putting a show together at that time. We have not really kept up since then, maybe a couple emails here and there, but when I had this opportunity to actually formally study with Ralph, I mean, I thought about this for about 2 seconds and jumped right on it. One of the things I told Ralph, he said, well, you've got the show, you're doing some cool stuff. And I said, okay, forget all that. I'm not going to talk about this on the show. I'm doing this for me. It was a personal thing where I wanted to rediscover who I was as a photographer, the kinds of work that I was doing. You guys haven't seen any of this. I didn't talk about it. It's something I just kept very separate from the show because it was such a personal quest that I was on. And what happened is over the next couple months is Ralph became another mentor figure for me. And he is an incredible guy. He is just, for somebody at his age to be doing the kind of work that he's still doing and to be progressive enough to teach online during a pandemic is just, it's unbelievable. And so I really look up to that. It's like in my next stage of life, that's what I want to become. I love Ralph Gibson. I mean, he's just amazing. And so I had an opportunity to not only study with him one-on-one, but we also did he did a bookmaking workshop that I took also. And just the wealth of knowledge. I've got reams of notes in the other room. I could not write things down fast enough. It was just such an intense experience. And that's something that I didn't seek it out, but the opportunity arose and I jumped on it. And it was just really important to do. So about that surprise that I mentioned earlier. So Ralph and I were talking about a month ago, and I made the comment, I said, the stuff that we've been discussing in some of our lessons, so to speak, where I've had sessions with him, this is just stuff that's just so fascinating. I wish it could reach even more people. And we talked about the idea of maybe him coming on and we do a series of videos together. And so that's what we're going to do. This is going to be an amazing opportunity for you guys to learn from Ralph. I think he's one of the great minds of our generation. He's certainly one of the most prolific and amazing photographers. Books have been his main source of output. He does a lot of shows too, but you can go find his books. This is going to be a big deal, I think, for everybody who watches these. We're going to put this together in a way where it's going to be kind of Fridays with Ralph or something, but we're going to check in. And Ralph is in New York, and so it's kind of hard to film when I'm down in Texas. So what we decided to do is just unproduced, super easy, just laid back. We're going to have to find a way to do this as a Zoom call and get it recorded where it's watchable. But I think we can do it, and I think I'm really excited about this. So I wanted to share with you guys. I'm cool to announce it. We're going to start filming those soon. So I will keep you posted on this, but that is coming. So anyway, if you guys have any questions about that or anything you want us to cover, please drop me a comment below. But talking about this mentor thing, catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.